coming to our early college summit. I think this is our second or third or fourth, but certainly our second but I thought we might begin by introducing themselves. Certainly your name, although we have our lovely name tags, but also what campus you come from and any other information that might feel relevant. So my name is Ann O'Dwyer, and I'm currently the Dean of Academic Affairs here at Simon's Rock. I also teach psychology, and I guess I'll just let everyone know that I will be going back to the faculty in the fall, and the incoming dean is sitting right next to me. So as I tearfully told the students at community meeting recently, Pat was dean when I was faculty, and now I'm coming back to the faculty. She's going to be my dean again, so I'm very excited. And I'm not crying yet.
And I was going to say that proof that I had been such a wonderful dean was that Anne cried when I told her that I was stepping down. But then she cried right there, so it proved again.
I cried, but she's stepping back up.
So I am currently the Dean of Studies in Queens.
Carla Stevens, history faculty in Newark.
Founding history faculty.
Still there.
I'm Ben Reitz. I'm a Chinese teacher at Baltimore, and I also teach Chinese film, specifically Kung Fu film.
I'm Judith Wynn. I'm from Simon's Rock, and I've been here since right after the Simon's Rock merged with Bard, and then I was here when we started BSEC Greenpoint, BSEC Manhattan. So I sort of feel like I've seen the whole thing go, and I thought it would be interesting for me to be here today, just to see where we're going, because I feel like I've been part of it.
I'm Nancy Honishak, and I used to be at Simon's Rock until I got fired from.
Let's not go into that.
I retired last December, and so Judith Wynn wins. You've been here longer than I have, but I think I'm second. I teach history, women's studies, a little Foucault, and I'm delighted to be here at this second summit.
Matt Hart, history faculty at Newark. I teach African history and world history.
Guy Risco, I'm literature faculty at Cleveland. I also teach in the seminar sequence.
I'm Jennifer Brody. I'm at Simon's Rock, and I'm a BA alum of Simon's Rock. And I was here when Judith arrived, but not when Pat arrived. But Pat hired me more than 20 years ago, and I'm still here. I teach literature. Comparative literature is my field. Women's and gender studies, and some communications classes, and seminar.
Jermaine Williams from BSEC Cleveland. I'm the principal and formerly from BSEC Newark.
I'm Chris
And where did you go to school?
I went to Bar College.
Oh.
Sorry, so bad with that.
I'm Chris Schroeder. I'll teach math in Baltimore in the fall.
I'm Lauren Lestraps. I'm at Bard in New Orleans, and I teach seminar. Sometimes I also teach economics, housing policy, tourism, and anthropological methods courses. I'm an anthropologist by training.
Tiffany Morris. I'm at BSEC Newark. I teach physics, mathematics, and engineering.
I'm John Weinstein. I'm the Dean of the Early Colleges for the Bard Network. I'm also currently the principal at BSEC Newark. And since Judith mentioned BSEC Greenpoint specifically as that, which is what preceded BSEC Manhattan, I was a founding faculty member there, faculty member at Simon's Rock as well in the past.
I think you need to spend a year in Queens just to learn.
So I'm thinking maybe a winter in New Orleans would be lovely.
I'm Brian Maxwell. I'm the library director here at Simon's Rock.
I'm Jessie Ward-Owens. I'm the academic director at Barrington College, New Orleans.
I'm Gwendolyn Hampton-Gansan. I'm also a BA alum, and I'm the director of equity and inclusion here at Simon's Rock.
I'm Sarah Muggeridge, also a Simon's Rock BA alum. Right now I'm working with the Academy, Bard Academy, advising and teaching literature.
Brady McCartney. I'm the Dean of Students at BSEC Baltimore. I also teach economics and seminar this year. I was with Dumaine and Guy last year at BSEC Cleveland, helping found that school. And I attended BARD for graduate school, which is how I became involved with all this early college business.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Eden Renee Hayes. Hayes is my last name. Eden Renee, I go by both together. Let's see, I am a psychology faculty in the college. I'm on the Council of Equity and Inclusion, political director, and I also teach with BARD Academy. I teach a media and culture class right now.
Good morning, my name is Brian Mateo. I work at Bard College Annandale as the Assistant Dean of Civic Engagement.
I'm Asma Abbas. I teach politics and philosophy, and I'm faculty fellow.
I'm Russell. I'm a sophomore here.
I'm Daniel. I'm a freshman here.
Valerie from Arjun. I'm the activities director here, and I have been feeding you some fellows over the years. I'm proud to say 4. I'm going to continue to do some more.
I'm Karen Rodriguez. I'm Dean of Studies in Cleveland.
I'm Shannon Leslie. I teach Latin, and I'm a founding faculty member at BSEC Queens, and Pat hired me.
And that person, there's a new person in the room. We missed you, and
I'm Ian Bickford. I'm provost here. Former, I want to say, in heart, current member of the faculty of BSEC Queens, and Pat hired me.
And where did you go to school?
Right here.
Well, continuing the legacies, maybe I will begin with. I started at BSEC Queens, where Pat hired me. I'm currently the academic director of the Bard Early College at Harlem Children's Promise Academy.
All right, thanks all. I also want to take a moment to thank Asma Abbas for all her work in putting this together. I think this is the second time you have pulled us all together, and we are really grateful for that. I guess I just want to say that, in some ways this coming together is so important. I think the chance for us to hear all of the good work and the challenges that we all have at our different campuses. I think those who were able to make it last year, the feedback we got, and I've heard even again today, is that the opportunity to get to know each other, to find out what each other are doing, and to explore the opportunities for partnerships and shared support, shared hand-wringing maybe too, across the campuses is really wonderful. The schedule for today talks about, I'm actually sitting in on a tutorial on neuroscience, and thought it was interesting that the title of the first session is sort of nodes and synapses. Well, the first title is around inclusion and equity, but the later title is around nodes and synapses, which we've been talking about as part of neurons. That was interesting. But the places for connection, the places where we can actually find new energy and new support together. I do want to say, I think I can speak for Asma here and thinking about this, is really a chance for conversation. We're not viewing any of the discussions this afternoon or this morning as presentations per se. They are opportunities for conversations. So for those who are leading, they will be asking more questions of us than talking at us, and I think that's really the goal here. Please do ask that everybody sort of share what's working on your campus, what are your challenges, what are your hopes and aspirations for the Bard Early College Network across the campuses. And as you sort of see again in the schedule, the goal really is to come away thinking about how can we work more closely together in the future, how can we find these opportunities for partnerships. So I'm hoping it's going to be a really exciting day, and I'm really looking forward to it. For some of you may know, there's a Discovery Day on campus, which is our Prospective Students Day, so some of us will be needing to go in and out a little bit. We do apologize, but we'll be here as much as we can during the day. So that's sort of my thoughts. Pat, if you want to add anything. Sounds great. Okay. Pat hired me too. So I think we can...
and me, I was the last one.
So I think we can go ahead and get started. have a special show.
Show us.
Presentation. We wanted to also take this opportunity to recognize Nancy Yanushek and all the work she's done for the college. She's going to hate this, I know, because we're very sorry. We really had to. And I think because in putting together this year's summit and last year's summit, we were really reflecting on two things. One is Asma is the faculty fellow here at Simon's Rock. This is a position where faculty member takes on a big project to really think about early college. And for some of the sort of early years of our sort of thinking across campuses, Nance had, her project as faculty fellow was to put together a book about early college pedagogies. And this is called Educating Outside the Lines. I've now had, I've had so many requests for copies over the years. It's my last copy, and I'm afraid I can't part with it. But I will put it out if you want to look at it, and we can certainly get some more on order if anybody would like some. So Nance put this book together. It was a real collaborative effort at the time with mostly Simon's Rock faculty. But again, to think about
students.
And I should actually say and students. That whole spirit of collaboration, and I think Nancy did a marvelous job, and it really still stands as sort of our sort of written piece of work about what we're trying to do here. So these summits, in some ways, I think, continue this tradition. In 2006, I think it was, we also started what was called the Center for Early College Pedagogy. Dan's worked on that. Pat, Joan Del Plato, who is on sabbatical this semester and not here. I also worked on that, and in some ways I think that bringing us together again is to try to continue that tradition of sort of bringing together all of us to talk about what we do and why we do it and how we do it. So much of what goes on today stands in legacy and growth from what Nance and Pat and Joan and some others started. So we wanted to take that moment to thank you for starting us along this path.
And now it's my turn.
Oh, you can talk to me.
We used to have a student at Simon's Rock named Andy Schiff. And the way he found out about Simon's Rock was he was at the grave of Jim Morrison in Paris. And someone came up to him and they started talking, and that person said, "Oh, I went to this weird little college, you should go there too." So that was how people heard about Simon's Rock in those days.
Great, Dr. Morrison.
Mission counselors there. Shall we send admission counselors there now?
And trauma counselors together.
Get all the graveyards in Paris. Get all the graveyards in Paris.
But so at a certain point in the history of the college, it became important to think about how to get across the message about it in other ways. And that's how I think about both the book and the workshops that we did as part of the Center for Early College Pedagogy. And it's not easy to translate. And I think an interesting thing about the book is how weird the essays in it are, how impossible it must have been to make it all make sense. I do think the best writing in there is the introduction and Nancy's connections. So I recommend that more than any one of the essays. Another thing about the present day, they say that nothing ever goes away on the internet. Well, if I look back through all my messages, there must be 800 messages from Nancy that say, here's the final plan for the summer workshop. So she was the one who what we would do is bring people from Alaska and Texas here during the workshop so that we would talk about the workshop strategies, and then they'd actually have a chance to go in and see workshop as it was happening. And it was amazing. I mean, you'd have people go, "Well, I read the book, I didn't get anything about it, I went to this, and these kids just showed me what it was about." So I think it was important for us in discovering the centrality of workshop to creating the culture of the school. But again, as with the book, where I think what Nancy brought with her great capacity to appreciate others and her intellect and ability to see patterns was to figure out how to take stuff that was just go see what's going on in workshop and make it all make sense. So we are so indebted to her for her leadership in this enterprise. But it's much more wonderful to work with people who are part of this network where it's an ongoing connection, not people that we send back to Fairbanks, Alaska and never see again, although they were very nice.
I just want to say we had 29 authors, I think 20 or so were faculty, about 3 were alums, and the rest were students. So I think that part was very pleasing to have that kind of collaboration across the generations, all the divisions. So thank you.
And now I think Ashma has one more little piece of
Yeah, so this is a little workshop experiment, Nance. So please accept it in that spirit. And I'm going to turn the lights off so people don't have to look at each other. But it's and maybe just listen. It's called Lara's Palimpsest to Nance. We'll see. Wait, second. Apologies for the roughness. A lot of people did things here.
This is Bill Dunbar, reading from the chapter. So what if you're a French major? You should totally be in the dance concert. Only one colleague posited a kind of original unity for knowledge, and no one explicitly mentioned a quest to reunify it. But as noted above, many spoke of the artificiality of disciplinary divisions. Moreover, they expressed other views about the integration, unity, and synthesis that call to mind a synoptic approach. Dance professor Wendy Schifrin sees the value of interdisciplinarity precisely in the fact that it is about relationship. It underlines the interconnectedness of the knowledge produced by all the disciplines and helps one to perceive the world in a more complex way, and therefore to act in a more ethical manner. A similarly holistic perspective is articulated by Professor of French and Arabic Gabriel B. Asfar. He too emphasizes the interrelatedness of disciplines,
and how one thinks about one's
and
friends.
recalls that early on in his time at Simon's Rock, the dean, who was a physicist, encouraged him to make connections among his various fields and with colleagues in other fields. Invited to teach as a whole person, Gabriel thinks of interdisciplinarity as a way of helping students turn into more whole human beings. That is, human beings with fewer holes.
They're at once idealistic and worldly, playful, often irreverent.
That is, human beings with fewer holes.
By Nancy Anashek.
Effective interdisciplinarity shares Foucault's idea of genealogy, a discomfort with the positing of absolutes, a suspicion of claims of objectivity, a rejection of teleological schemata, and an emancipatory aim.
It thus entails contesting ideas about hierarchical relationships between disciplines, similarly to other conceptions of the topic, including those of my Simon's Rock colleagues. It emphasizes the permeability of the boundaries between them.
Also, like genealogy, it problematizes the hierarchical relationships between disciplinary practitioners and the objects of their inquiries, when these are living persons who might be marginalized or inappropriately silenced. In other words, again, like the approach of my Simon's Rock colleagues articulated throughout this collection, it entertains and takes seriously the voice of the layperson, our non-expert.
Genealogy, in Foucault's idiom,
is an approach to studying the past that is meant to undermine what we have assumed is self-evident, eternal, natural, immutable, or predetermined about the human condition.
As much as we, faculty and administrators, endorse interdisciplinarity as an important goal of our academic programs and work systematically and consciously to make it a meaningful part of our curriculum, there is no set of requirements and assignments that can fully determine how this goal is accomplished. And while we have significant commonalities in our understandings of the term and its educational value, in the end there is no definitive statement that can be made about what it means for us or for our students. Nevertheless, it will continue simply to happen.
We strongly believe that students at all levels will have worthy and original ideas to contribute to any discussion topic under consideration, based on what they already know of their thoughtful engagement with the texts and with what they are hearing in class. My contention here is that effective interdisciplinarity is a significant dimension of how these students, and indeed any college student, as subjects of subjugated knowledges, empower themselves by bringing to bear information, concepts, and methodologies that they encounter in one course into another.
Conflict and resistance as aspects of effective interdisciplinarity. I want to emphasize that when it occurs in the midst of a class conversation, all involved have an interest in maintaining amicable relations, and we regularly remind each other that our goal is to deepen our knowledge of a complex topic. As I often say in classes to illustrate Foucault's famous statement, "Power is everywhere," no one has power definitively in a Simon's Rock classroom. It flows from one of us to another at any given moment, and my comments as teacher, as well as any other participant's views, may be contested, ignored, accepted, or modified. In other words, rarely does anyone, either particular students or the teacher, actually win the argument. The point is that in these fleeting moments, students have been listened to as representative experts on various dimensions of a difficult and important issue to which all have contributed useful perspectives, and they can feel that they have moved us in productive
And how one thinks about one's friends and
I
colleagues
have named
and oneself.
effective interdisciplinarity after effective history, because the latter encompasses both Foucault's critical attitude toward traditional modes of disciplinary inquiry and his alternate methodology. In effect, it describes the activity of conducting a genealogical inquiry. Just as effective history is about history in motion, documenting power shifts and reversals and positing instability, change, and discontinuities in place of assumptions about constants, stability, or destination, so is effective interdisciplinarity in motion. Just as effective history attends to testimony, often not considered significant in traditional historical approaches, i.e., the ideas and attitudes of the marginalized and disempowered, the fleeting ideas and actions not considered historically worthy.
As they move, sometimes with breathtaking speed between adult and adolescent and back again, the faculty moves with them, enjoying their exuberance, their feistiness, and above all, taking them seriously as learners on the brink of beginning their adult lives. So what if you're a French major who should totally be in the dance concert, and how one thinks about one's friends and colleagues and oneself?
Meant to address the exponential increases of information of the internet age, as well as the separation of much scientific research from the ethical and practical problems, from, quote, social enemy to climate change, unquote, facing us in the current historical moment.
And as an expression of an academic environment that nurtures a spirit of intellectual venture and a recognition that the complexities of our world cannot be understood or its richness appreciated when compartmentalized within traditional ways of organizing our knowledge about it.
Becoming conscious, perhaps for the first time, that received knowledge might be questioned, that many of one's views may have been based on such knowledge obtained from parents, teachers, or the larger culture. How does such a student advance an informed opinion that is not derivative of these sources? How does she resist the temptation to insist on the familiar, what is natural, or what everybody knows, to defer to yet another authority, the teacher, another, perhaps older student, or to retreat to a safe but ultimately unproductive relativism? Everybody has a right to his or her own opinion.
To retreat to a safe but ultimately unproductive relativism. Everybody has a right to his or her opinion.
In other words, how does she authorize herself to speak in a new situation?
In contrast to common ways of thinking about power in the West, Foucault does not see it as a commodity or a quality that a person or an institution can possess. In his pioneering work on the history of sexuality, Foucault argues that power is a relationship, or a series of relationships, a, quote, multiplicity of force relations, immanent in the sphere in which they operate. These force relations are unstable and constantly moving, engendering states of power and resistance, actions and reactions that produce new relationships. Moreover, rather than operating simply in a negative fashion, i.e. as a dominant power oppressing a weaker one, these power relationships are mutually constitutive, i.e. they form and reform the subjectivities involved, as they are continually acting on and hence changing each other. Indeed, for Foucault, where there is no resistance, no mutual interaction, there is no power, or more precisely, no power relationship. He elaborated on the implications of this possibility of resistance in his later work, where he defined power as the governing of the actions of another, and explicitly acknowledged that it entails freedom. Finally, he argued that analyses of power that focus on its centralized apparatuses miss the core of shifting power relationships, which occur at the local level, where power is most intimately operationalized. In other words, rather than focus on the formal political institutions of the state, we might more productively look at the local relationships of warden and prisoner, physician and patient, or teacher and student.
Betty is no longer with us. Stan has retired from the college, but continues with his poetry, and we are now Bard College at Simon's Rock. The roads are paved, and the Pizza Huts are dwarfed by a number of impressive centers, buildings dedicated to the sciences, the performing arts, and to athletics. Bowen, now a vice president at Bard College, has helped to found 2 early college high schools where students also start college work before the traditional age, but he still comes back to campus to cook his legendary curries. Most importantly, our students still speak their minds. As a visitor to a recent Board of Overseers meeting told me, she was astonished at how readily Senior Timothy Myers and Junior Isaac Salgado entered into a discussion about campus transportation problems and told Emily Fisher, chairman of the board, what's what. She was no less astonished at how intently Emily listened. And everyone from Emily to Tim and Gabe is still on a first-name basis, a ritual of campus culture which helps to enact the crossing of conventional boundaries of age and status that it symbolizes.
Nevertheless, it will continue simply to happen, in discussions in our classrooms and our offices, in chance conversations at lunch and in the dorms, and in those solitary moments when individuals think through the thorny scholarly and creative tasks they have set for themselves.
Most importantly, our students still speak their minds.
Idealistic though it may sound, what most of us feel about what we do here, as students, faculty, administrators, staff, and alumni, is gratitude for the opportunities we have had to know each other and a deep satisfaction in what we have been able to accomplish together. This is my famous class of '98. Thank you, Nancy.
I have no idea what I'm about to say, except how honored I am. I still always want to say I feel like Tom Sawyer and Becky Sharp going into the church where they were hearing the eulogies after they were supposedly drowned in the cave. I think the music helped quite a bit. I appreciated Dr. Zhivago at the end. And perhaps now I can finally figure out what I actually meant by effective interdisciplinarity. I think I can articulate it. And I just wanted to point out, I'm really so grateful to point out that many other voices, I don't know how you got all those voices to say those things, were represented in the tape that we heard. It wasn't simply my art playing with Foucault. So again, I'm very honored. I'm not going to cry, so thank you very much.
Should we get started? First panel.
Yeah, John and Gwendolyn and Ian, we can sort of find them a space together or...
Good morning. We'll start by each just addressing a little bit about questions to open it up. So I think in terms of starting with this question about the communities that we consider ourselves part of, that's an interesting one for me to think about because I've been part of many different communities within our early college network, and then even just within each of those spaces, there's other communities as well. I do think that for me, because I've worked with many people here in different contexts, in my mind, you all know each other as well as I know each of you, but of course that's not how it really goes. It's a little bit like, there's some people that I went to high school and college with, and I always find it confusing when I'm with them that not everybody who knows them knows everybody I've ever met. So for me, it's a little bit weird that I've spent a lot of time having Carla as a colleague, and I spent time having Jenny as a colleague. So in my mind, Jenny and Carla know each other really well. Of course, they probably actually don't. So I think that the more different communities we can all be a part of, the more opportunities we have for that kind of synergy. So I think that for each of us, there's the communities we have within our various institutions that we work at. Again, which interestingly, as we did the introductions, there are multiple communities for that. I think the more we can increase that, the more that it helps with some of those synergies. Dean Renee has come down to Newark twice to teach psychology class during what's called Exterm, which is our June intensive. She's doing that again this year. Now I start to have students who ask about, is that professor who taught psychology coming again? I want to take her next class. So we can start to create these connections in that way. I also think that each of our institutions also resides in a community, right? And when I've been up here, the relationship between Simon's Rock as its world, the Berkshires as a larger community, various pieces of that have also played into my sense. And I do think that that's some place where we can make greater inroads in all the cases. That's something that's the same in Newark, which is a very different, in some sense, a very different school-community relationship than Simon's Rock would have with the Berkshires, but I would also say sort of equally not developed in a sense. And I think that in all cases we have this issue of to what extent is the school and the institution part of that community, and to what extent is it in some ways almost opposed. In Newark, we have the challenge that a lot of what we're doing are things that seem very strange to the community outside of us. I mean, I certainly have parents who scold me because I don't require the students to stand up and salute me when I walk in the room. And in that parent's mind, that's an important part of a strong education. For me, that's not at all my conception of it, but there's this same need to kind of get across to the families what it is we're trying to do. I feel like in our current state of being in Newark, we're in our 5th year. Most of our students, certainly the older students, would be able to articulate what we consider to be our Bard High School early college culture at that school. That doesn't mean every minute of the day they're living what that is. But they do know when they're more on culture and more off culture. We're definitely in a different position in relation to our families. I think the percentage of families who kind of get what we're doing at the school, maybe a 5th. Watching Carlin said, she's probably thinking I was generous with him. Maybe 2%. Or we do have families who, they know it's a good place for their children, though they're not exactly sure why. Mostly they think it's a good place for their children because the children are very excited to go to school. So I think there's this question of also, to what extent do we need to articulate this? To what extent does it become kind of better known? As you go, is it enough that the families know the kids love being in our schools? And I think that is something that's pretty true at all the schools. And all the ones that I've taught at myself anyway were places where the students really liked being at it. They felt like they went to the best schools that they could possibly go to. So I think, and that's there. I'm thinking of the communities and all the different pieces, and how we can benefit from the synergy of these intersecting, but also be aware that sometimes there's differences. You know, at Simon's Rock, I hear a lot about the bubble. I mean, the whole time that I was here, I'm still on all the listservs, so I get to live this sort of interesting experience of being from outside of that. And I guess in defense of bubbles, I would say sometimes a bubble is a good thing. I do think there's something kind of wonderfully luxurious about getting to sort of be away from the real world a bit. And if Simon's Rock is a community that isn't really like the real world exactly, it can be great to say, okay, for now, the actual world's problems are not on my mind so much. I'm going to think about these issues in abstract ways, in a space that can be more idealized than the real world is, perhaps. Sometimes in Newark, I wish life intervened a little less and we could be more of a bubble. But the issues of students' lives come in so much. You know, I wish that student could not worry about all the things she has to do at home when she gets home and could actually just go sit on a rock somewhere and try to figure out what on earth John Locke is saying in this sentence. Right? So maybe the places that feel more bubble. What?
John Locke and her problems might have a connection.
Right. Actually, well, I mean, we were talking in Newark where we have a school system where there is actually no consent of the government, quite literally. So I think perhaps the places that are more bubble-like can help give some of the sense of bubble to those who are not, and maybe the places where life intervenes can give those in the bubble who wish to have life intervene more places where they can experience those interventions.
In defense of the bubble and also dialectically to burst it. I think it's important, and partly because Wendell and I were speaking with a single group of students the other night. We were talking to the students about the importance of college as retreat from the urgencies of the world, and also advance into those urgencies with the premise that you can make a contribution to them. You know? And that's it's interesting how that the safe space of the college campus is both convenient, right, and then sometimes for students shattered, right, when they find out that actually the bubble isn't insulation, it's more porous. So I thought what I wanted to say was that. The line that hooked for me in the palimpsest of Nance's chapter was the line about first names, which actually I think is Simon's Rock, which doesn't have to be true everywhere, it doesn't have to be replicated everywhere, but at Simon's Rock, a very important part of the culture, and the college culture and the academic culture, is the radical inclusion of everybody sharing the same essential nomenclature. All first names. And so in Queens, I was always Ian. At Simon's Rock, in my different roles, I'm always Ian. And so I think that that actually students buy the reality of the college, right? It's not an approach to college. It's not a modified college, right? Much more with the first name basis than there would with Professor Bickford or Professor Hayes. You know, there's something about that I think is important. But actually, what I want to say is that today is the 450th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. Interesting. What Shakespeare had to say about dying through Hamlet is readiness is all. And that's that's a phrase that always sort of like encroached on my thinking when both in Queens and as I traveled between campuses in some of my my recent work in thinking about the frame that high schools take, the language of readiness, it's almost a drumbeat, readiness in secondary education, college career readiness anchor standards as a common core. There's something very dark about that. That is, if high school is convened as preparation for readiness for college, if college and university is increasingly framed as preparation for a career, well, one, that's a long time to delay the promised gratification of the career, and two, once you have the career, like, what's that about? It's not necessarily the great reward that we start telling kids great or early. Delay gratification, and gratification isn't always that gratifying. So part of what I love about early college is that it problematizes the concept of readiness as it's deployed in secondary education nationally by bureaucrats. I was talking to a group of prospective early college students, and I observed just an hour ago that Shakespeare died at 52, wrote 37 plays, one of the most complicated sonnet cycles in English language, any language, at least two major narrative poems, and also Night by Night, Afternoon by Afternoon, actually, acted in all of the plays. It's a lot, you know, and so how do you compare that to any living author's Amazon list? It's impressive. How does he do that? Part of it is that he started early. You know, there's no need to wait around. Around 15, 16, you see young Shakespeare start to think about heading out and doing what he wants to do. We had a speaker, our Du Bois speaker this year, Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr., who's a close colleague of Martin Luther King Jr., who Dr. Lafayette shared with us that Dr. King had shared with him that when Dr. King went to college at 15, it was that he understood what his work needed to be. He understood how important it was, and who would wait around? I think it's a very important thing for our students. So then the last thing I'll say is that thinking about inclusion and thinking also again about the Common Core and readiness and what that means, there's only one author mandated anywhere in the Common Core for all high school students in states that practice the Common Core to read, and that's Shakespeare. And I take that to be a problem. I take that to be a problem as somebody who, I'm an early modernist, I teach Shakespeare and Milton, I take them to be important. However, I think one of the things that we're up to, and one of the things that we can really do together, is to think about and collaborate on a curriculum that isn't so limited or fetishizing of one tradition.
So good morning, everyone. So I mentioned I'm a BA alum from 92, and I'm just in my third month back on campus as a staff member. So I still feel like I'm getting myself oriented. And I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what it is that I feel like my role is at this point. And as a director of equity and inclusion, what I've been doing is looking at what equity and inclusion looks like at Simon Drop. And I think going along with bubble ideas, it doesn't look much different than it looks out in the rest of the world. I've been in the Berkshire community doing diversity, cultural competence, integration work for about a decade, and it looks about the same. And what I feel like I am here in response to students asking for me to be here and help support social justice and integration inclusion work happening on campus. I've been hearing it from the outside and involved in our diversity day. I've been involved in faculty training, cultural competence training with Eden Renee for the last year. And I'm just right now trying to bring all those things together. What it looks like to be an environment that's equitable, what inclusion actually means, and I'm very clear it means something different from the professor point of view than from the activist point of view, but it all has to come together. So we're looking at it and putting together an interdisciplinary I'm trying to think, what communities I'm a part of? I'm a part, as I said, of the Berkshire community, I'm a part as an alum, and I'm a part of Simon Jock's staff. And I'm just bringing it all together. A little lost for words. What else should I say? Any questions? I'm very new and everything is being created, right? So I'm the chair of this council. We are looking at what inclusion looks like for students. We're listening and doing a design thinking process where we're actually taking a point of view of faculty, administration, and staff. And in that, creating what our charter looks like, what we're going to be doing on our campus. I'm very much interested in looking at our recruitment, retention, and integration on our campus. Let's see what else we're working on. And really making sure the students feel like they have a place no matter what their background is. And I'm interested in the early network system being a place where students with very diverse background are being successful, and the students with a diverse background here having a different sort of challenge on a campus that is in a bubble and predominantly white in a very predominantly white area. So I'm interested in meeting and hearing about the early college network system as well as comparing that with the Simon Jock system. In my work in the community, I've been really inspired to work with the local high school students in Pittsfield having an early college experience with our state college, Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts, and looking at what Simon Jock has done, I think, really well, and looking at the model of the VSEC system and marrying that with what the Berkshires is trying to provide for our inner city kids of poverty and in relation to MCLA, and hoping that I can bring all those things together and integrate them. So.
I'll say also that Gwendolyn and I are new together. I'm very pleased that she was the first person that I had the privilege to hire here at Simon's Rock. Exciting, I actually think it's really important work. So a few of us here, John and Pat and I, and maybe others, having worked either among or at the interstices between the various things we call early college. I've talked to both of you about this. I've never really seen them as different places exactly, but as one place, or at least as one idea shared out across different sites, right? I know that's not true for everybody, right? I mean, there are people who have spent many years at one of these sites, right, without necessarily working with others, at least not directly. And I think that's interesting, so that brings different perspectives into the room about what we're doing and where we're doing it. So the first question here is especially interesting to me, and first sort of internally for the early colleges, and then also thinking outward to our students and their communities and radially, what communities do we consider ourselves part of? And that's where we'll start. What communities do we consider ourselves? How would we name and define those communities?
It's hard
Maybe a
to,
worker. Sorry.
Exactly time. It's hard to imagine seeing all of the early colleges as one. I literally can't. And so I think we might be coming from opposite approaches, which is really interesting. In New Orleans, we're an all part-time faculty, so I don't even feel like I'm a part of the Bard Early College network as a person, as an employee, as a worker, as a teacher. But it's interesting how important I think the Bard Early College experience is for our students, and I feel like we're very much a part of public education in New Orleans. We're increasingly a part of a big conversation about responding to negative education reform, to neoliberal education reform in particular, that's been damaging to our students, and to students in New Orleans, and we have those students. So it's interesting, I think it's like, when you said that you really do picture it all as one, I was like, wow, that's the opposite of how I think about it as a member.
No, I was just thinking of communities in the abstract because some days you can only think of communities in the abstract. I think, you know, depending on the morning, right? Like I wake up thinking like a worker, or you know, that's a safe place for me to go to when I'm angry at things. You know, I think increasingly things have a trust on you that like you didn't choose, so then you become a part of a community of, you know, kind of marginal political theorists who are trying to do something with political science that nobody in the mainstream wants to do. So you find a home in a place like Simon's Rock to do that work that would not happen elsewhere. So it's a community of scholarship of a particular kind that invests in teaching as a way to do scholarship rather than, you know, a kind of a detachment from it. So it's like actually a way to be a vocational political theorist is to actually only be a teacher of politics and kind of undo that. So I think that's very important for me, and that's, given the day, it feels real, and given another day, like it completely feels unavailable here, you know, because the intellectual project that sometimes one imagines being like one person doing something or two, you know, like it just doesn't seem available. So that community has to be always a gesture to come, you know, it's like a redemption, you know, in the future, but like but this is the space where to find it in a weird way, like otherwise you'd be kind of eaten up in different ways. So I think that's very important for me. Increasingly, I think as a Muslim woman who never like appropriated that identity as a place from which to speak, that's becoming more and more like thrust on me, largely because of how I can be excluded from other communities, including white communities and not white communities. So I think that's a very awkward place I've never been in, to understand, oh, was I an immigrant? Am I not a person of color? Am I a person of color? Am I a mother? Like, what happens first? And I think that's been very, like, I think it's really, really compulsively destructive to me, like, not to figure out who I am on a given day to someone. And I don't know who else is asked that question, like, you know. So I think for me, like, I don't know where one finds community in a shared project of inclusion if a lot of people don't believe there is a problem or believe it in only very palatable ways. Like, they have to be really simple and definitive for them to be ways to believe in them. So I think that's very confusing for me as a person. But otherwise, yeah, I'm a community of teachers and community of women and decolonial thinkers. Yeah, like, I'm interested in not defending what produced me. So it's a lonely community sometimes here.
As I was hearing the dialogue between the two of you, I'm from Mississippi, so New Orleans is very familiar. And I'm from New Orleans too. So connected by 55 and 10. So I'm thinking about a regional, perhaps I want to say isolation, but separation, right? From what seems otherwise within the BART community. For many of us Northeastern, right? Coming out, growing out of the Northeast, right? California, New Orleans, Turkey, beyond. But I'm thinking about the way you describe your students' experiences, which from my knowledge of the Bechdel model is something that they experience every day. That Bechdel is about creating a space where students can take part in the intellectual venture that we heard in Laura Wright's palimpsest, the dance, right? That Bechdel becomes a space where you get away from, okay, you have to have this in biology in order to be able to pass to the next grade. And if you don't get it this week, well, I guess we're going to do it again next week. And that those neoliberal educational reforms and practices are a part of my students' own daily lives, such that the idea of community becomes this kind of tenuous thing, right? Is it going to be this community of teenage angst, like, we don't want to do this, right? And so this is how we come to community in resistance to these expectations. This is what you're going to do. Do we move towards community through that intellectual venture that it seems like early college is trying to create? And so in that regard, I can't say that I have, Harlem is not that far from Houston Street. But it's far enough that it feels like sometimes we are in different worlds between BSEC Manhattan and Quite Early College and Harlem Children's Zone. But thinking about creating that space, whether our students left that other world where they felt that they were confined, or they leave it from period to period, or by a school bus, I feel like that is part of the connecting, those are the connecting links that bring us together, in that we're always aiming to create that other space where there can be that energy of venture, that possibility of venture, where otherwise it's like, here's your box to blow up.
In thinking about this, maybe the student and the faculty staff perspective on what the space is may kind of be inherently very different, and also just from a network perspective. I mean, Newark has kind of since its inception been the most African American space of the network. I mean, I feel like in early years our main role seemed to be to provide photos for all of the other documents. So none of the data on the fact sheet would be about Newark because we didn't have it yet, but all 5 of the pictures were in Newark. So I think it's got a lot of photo play. And even though our proportion, African American proportion, has gone down from 80% to about 65 as our Latino proportion has risen, which actually means this is the first year, I think, that BSEC Newark, when we talk about diversity, people would say, oh, BSEC Newark is a really diverse BSEC. I think this is the first year we no longer meet the federal classification of a segregated school, because if a certain percentage of your students are already raised, you're legally segregated. So we actually were segregated despite being quote unquote diverse. So I think for the BARD network, BSEC Newark is perhaps the most African American space that network or network people might go to. But for our students, that school building is perhaps for them the least African American space they go to during their day. For the students who are African American, for the Latino students, it probably is the most African American space. So depending on who it is and what other spaces you're in, I know we're considered a very white school. Like the kids will say, all the teachers here are white. I'm like, actually only 40% of the teachers here are white, so that's not a factual statement, but they're also, whiteness is being expressed as more than just race, right? So when students, I discovered early on in Newark, students say, well, this is a black teacher and this is a white teacher, and that was not entirely a racial category. So, some of the things, we're not first name basis in Newark, but when Ian was talking about that, even though the students call me Dr. Weinstein, there's lots of ways in which my relationships with them will be considered way too close and non-hierarchical for what is considered proper in Newark. So we still have that. That in itself starts to put us in the category of a white school. Right? So that's where I think as we talk about these terms and these elements, it really depends on who you are and what it's compared to. But perhaps if we have more different examples, that helps us think about it in a different way.
And because of that, I have a very different experience than Asma, because BSEC Newark was the first place that I could be all of me. I could be a relatively old black lesbian with a PhD, and yes, so that is the only space that I can be all of that, all of the time. And so students, when they articulate who I am, I'm just Dr. Stevens, and Dr. Stevens is all of that stuff. But I went to a meeting at the district and I had to go in girl drag. I lived a large portion of my life in girl drag, so it was comfortable enough, but knowing that I was still in Newark, but I had to think really hard about what I was going to wear because I was going to this meeting. I don't have to do that, so it is still a bubble for me. And I also come from, a distressed background, so I can talk about growing up poor and all kinds of things that I can do in BSEC Newark. So BSEC Newark is my community because I can be completely me there, and I can express all of me there with my students. So that's why I'm founding faculty and still there.
I think in the context of the network and thinking through what the communities are and what they exist, I think one of the things
reflecting on is how much of this is deliberate community buildings. Like, I think a lot of it is what we bring into basically when that we're deliberately bringing because it's part of the bar and part of the college, and we're going to make sure that that's a part of the community. And what happens kind of by default, and then also what is thrust upon us, right? So part of it really, in my opinion, is, you know, depends on, as I said, New Orleans, the geography. Part of it is the local school district, the partners. Part of it is, I think for us, a big part of the community is the students. I mean, community, a big part of it has to do with numbers, right? There are all these students and they bring in their perspectives, they bring in their personalities, they bring in their approaches and their sense of community. So I think a big part of it is responding also to what their needs are, and also responding to their perspectives. And so I think, thinking through this idea of community as I, last couple of years been trying to build a community of the new school, and responding to things that we're doing very deliberately and saying, we're doing this because this is something that we believe in, and we know it doesn't exist here, and we're deliberately forming that community, versus things where it's a negotiation in the local environment, the community that exists, and then also figuring out how to have the layers of faculty versus students, comfort, and a space that can have faculty, I hope, express thoughts like Carla expressed about being part of a community in a very deliberate way, in a very responsive way, versus a student perspective of that same thing, knowing that it's a community that, because it's deliberately created, is somewhat uncomfortable, right? Students in the first week at the BSEC generally feel a little uncomfortable because it's still new. Like, what are these people doing and why are they doing it this way, right? And we do that every year, and we know we're doing it, and we know that discomfort exists, and it's deliberate. Versus how that student feels at the end of 4 years, and how they've been folded into a community in a very positive way, we hope, that they can really reflect on, and then hopefully take that community with them further on. So I think that, thinking about all those different elements of the deliberateness of the community versus the responsiveness, I guess, of the community.
I was going to pick up on your word deliberate because we're in the heart of our admissions process, which is long and laborious and requires lots of interviews and auditions, as many of you know. And it was this moment to me a month ago where I realized that we are actually creating our community. Like, we have an opportunity to think about, are we leveling access? Are we being inclusive? Are we asking the right questions so that students can best represent themselves? Because these are going to be our community of people, and they are going to be back here next year. And I was just thinking about that as an opportunity for community.
It's been on my mind in thinking about this gathering, I was just in Baltimore, visiting BSEC Baltimore, and being on the phone with many of you week to week. Whether we can also deliberately build that greater community that's hard to see among the early colleges, which is that's kind of what I'm attentive to, is that I think that's not necessarily something we've done over 15 years now, always, practiced always. For me, it's very my community is honestly is early college. Much more than any other space in my life. My dad is principal of BSEC Baltimore. Many of my best friends work here, and two of my dearest friends are administrators at BSEC Baltimore and Harlem Children's Home. The intersections for me are very powerful, and I feel that I personally gain from that daily. My mentors are in this group too. So as I think about what community I'm part of, it's actually geographically very diffuse. I haven't been to all of them. This is the thing. So we find, as you do in a space, you find areas that you frequent and areas that are strange. But I think part of, in my mind, why occasions like this are important is that is exactly this domain is building deliberately the community that we might want. So thinking of that, what kinds of communities, and thinking about admissions, right, to start with, what kinds of communities do we seek to create within our institutions? So putting aside the network for the moment, but within our institutions, what do we hope for from year to year? What do we try to build? How do we try to build it?
I'm a new teacher at the Bar of Baltimore, and I remember coming for the first training week, and I was kind of thinking, like, ahead of time, probably we'll be talking about like which classroom we'll get and where the bathrooms will be, and like procedure for fire drills and stuff like that. But when I got there, I found out we were going to be doing writing and thinking for a whole week and not talk about any of that stuff. And I think that was kind of a central piece of learning the philosophy. And Michael Murray from Newark was kind of the messenger to come and spread the word about this BARD idea that I'd never heard of before. So I think that'll help from year to year as we onboard new faculty and double in size next year. Doing the same thing, maybe with Michael Murray, maybe with another messenger. Next year will help to spread that philosophy too. So yeah. And then with students again, for the first at least 3 days, maybe a whole week, right? I think sets a tone, I think, for us to dip into throughout the year in our courses. And I've tried to sprinkle in writing and thinking exercises into all of my classes at various times, and I think that helps to get that academic interest and freedom of expression in the classroom. But that's one thing. Another thing, going back to community, Ian's dad has been really great.
Let's call him Ian's dad.
One of the ways that he really creates community is by having an optional morning meeting just for 10 minutes, but it's really nice to stand in the room together before we enter our classrooms or maybe after setting up for a bit, but just to share some ideas and kind of check in, have that human contact before we go out and do everything for the whole day. And that's really helpful. It's optional, but we usually all are there if we can be. And then the advisory program at our school, I think, really sets up the whole tone of our school. Our counselor, Colin Wiseman, has really been an indispensable person to keep us clued into what's going on and also keep us delivering the lessons about a whole variety of skills and ways to communicate with our students. So we meet for half an hour every day with our select group of about 12 or maybe 15 students, and they also check in with us in the morning, kind of like our morning meeting. That's a good time for students to come together and like have some informal conversations before they go to their classes. And I think that helps set just a strong sense of community for our school. Yeah, we meet for 10 minutes at the beginning. It's kind of like a homeroom check-in.
We took the opposite approach of most of the early colleges. We decided to just triple down on advisory because Frankie Gamber, our principal, our head of our early college, who was our principal, she had such a great advisory experience and saw that BARD had advisory built in. And obviously we were aware of challenges at other early colleges, but she really believed in it, so we had our counselor really figure out how to make it a productive part, which is not perfect by any means, but it has been a plus in a way that I didn't expect. After our time in Cleveland together, I did not expect advisory to go well. It was a real challenge with everybody, students, faculty, administrators. But yeah, that was a very intentional part of our community. When we talk with parents about how do you transmit whatever it means to be a BARD or assignments rock institution, that is generally, one, a talking point, which is useful, but more importantly, it is a 30-minute block of time plus that 10 minutes to start the day that allows us to communicate like what makes you a BARD student, what makes you an early college student, and what makes you part of Baltimore, part of this specific school, part of the school district, so you can have those layers of conversation.
And then also, we always have a sort of like rough sketch of a lesson to deliver, but sometimes a student will come in and share some really deeply disturbing news or something going on in their life, and it's a really good chance for students to just have that time to connect and to be helped when they need help, or ask for ideas if they need that.
Can you, Ben, or Brady, or Gwendolyn, speak to restorative practices? This has also been a deliberate piece of. Good, do you want to start?
I'll just say that that's one thing I didn't say earlier, is that one of the things I think would be really valuable at Simon Talk is building a restorative practice, restorative justice community. And Bob Graves is looking into instituting that in August for the upcoming year. And these meetings you're talking about is built on that model, the restorative practice model. Which is, the main thing that I like is the meeting and having that community built, and then also when there are incidents on campus, as opposed to punitive action, you have circles and you speak, and it's all about repair and repairing the harm and restoring relationships and not the punitive piece. So that I think is a really essential piece to any learning community and any educational community.
And we're really following here Baltimore's model in doing that. It's been really wonderful to have an experimental site, right? You guys are trying something we haven't done before exactly, and to be able to learn from what other people are trying.
I would say naturally a lot of these early colleges seem to do restorative work.
Yeah.
I know in Cleveland, I think that we talked about restorative practices. And I think it's just naturally your approach, which I certainly took the lead from Maine. But I think it's just in treating students as students and human beings rather than visitors and less than, or whatever power dynamic you want to assert. I think that just innately lends itself to the restorative practices or whatever you want to call them. I took many years of nonviolent communication workshops when I was working in the Bay Area, and semi-restorative could be just plugged into nonviolent communication. So these are practices that have been used, but maybe not as intentionally.
I was wondering, could you give me an example like these restorative practices? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Maybe
So,
something that happened on your campus that.
so we had a group of about 6 students who just were not allowing instruction to happen. They were, I don't want to use the word terrorizing their professor, but certainly challenging their professor, as well as just making the education of the other 20 students impossible. So we spoke with those 6 students individually, had mediation individually, then with the 6 of them, with administration, with that faculty member, and then we brought them all into their classroom after school with their classmates and their other professors who had seen similar behavior, and we just talked through motivations, why you do this, and then maybe most importantly, having their fellow students call them out for their behavior and talk about that effect, because they're used to engaging with professors in a way that, like, obviously you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this. But when they hear it from a 14-year-old peer or 15-year-old peer, I think it hits home in that way. It's like, actually, I do care about my education, and you are detracting. And I go home at night and I talk to my mom and my dad or my grandma, whoever is at home, and I complain and I get sad and I cry about this because, like, this is my education. This is not just your time. And that dynamic, I think, is the most powerful one that I've seen. But yeah, it's very intentional sort of process.
Thanks. I don't know if you want another example, but we have a student that chose to put some racist comments on Facebook, right? And some other students called an outline, and Bob convened a meeting with Ian and myself, and the student that posted and 2 other students interacted with it. And it was really interesting to see the student own his behavior, after an hour and a half or so. Own his behavior. Really, I think what I found the most valuable was giving him an opportunity to be heard on his experience at Simon Talk and also his interpretation of freedom of speech. And we had a great conversation about hate speech, and the students also talked about their experiences. And that went on, and we left the meeting with an agreement. He volunteered to write an apology to the students. And what I really value is that since then he's been in my office twice to have more conversations about race. And he really wants to learn. And I think if we had just come as punishment for posting racist comments on Facebook, we wouldn't be anywhere better.
And that brings up one of the in terms of the original presentation. I think it brings back that idea of the what communities we want to create. I think the inclusion part is a real part of the communities that we want. I think one of the kind of real hallmarks of the communities, as far as I've experienced at the diverse campus, is that it's always been very deliberately inclusive, right? Which is challenging because I think I personally have also kind of responded negatively to the whiteness of BARD over the years, experiencing BARD, just frankly. And so I think it's just always been something that has been clear on every campus, is that this is a space that is, whether you're talking about race or religion or sexuality, whatever, it is extremely inclusive. And I think that the faculty, in my opinion, really embrace that in all across the board, and the students have learned to embrace it in many communities that I work in. But I think it's just always been something that is really special. I think a lot of institutions will say that that's something that they value. I think the experience of many of us who work with BARD really can see concrete examples of how that's played out in a real significant way. And I think thinking through the different, thinking of this as one big community versus 10, 12 small communities working together, I think it raises questions in my mind about, and again, I'm at this point now, like faculty recruitment and kind of thinking through who applies to these jobs. I always think about who doesn't apply, like who doesn't think of BARD as a place they want to work, and why not. It's kind of a question, who sees that and is like, no, I want to apply there. Because those people exist, right? So I can always think about who will they exclude, not deliberately, but just end up excluding. And are we losing opportunities there, or are those people that we don't want as part of our community? So that's kind of like an abstract kind of question of who doesn't think of this network as somewhere that would be a place from a faculty perspective or a student perspective, but somewhere where they would want to be, and why, and if that's okay with us, or is that something that we see a room for adjustments or changes that would help kind of expand our community. So that's kind of a kind of thought I had about kind of this idea of the flip side of inclusiveness.
So Domain, you're creating transition in a beautiful way. So what I think, if it's okay with the two of you, what I'd like to do is spend the rest of our time in this session focusing on this question: how do we understand the mission of BARD early colleges in relation to inclusion? Where does it reside? In our internal conversations here at Simon's Rock, we've been seeking to define our mission not just as early and liberal arts, early liberal arts and inclusive. Conversation at Simon's Rock about inclusion is as likely to focus on the experience and safety of transgender students as to focus on race. I'm just thinking about the intersectionality of our students. We have a higher than average population for high schools or colleges of students who have identified, not necessarily a higher population of students who have identified as transgender or non-cisnormative. And so that's a big part of our conversation. But we really are thinking that for us, these three pillars of what we do are equally important and equally constitutive, mutually constitutive. Any thoughts? How do we think about our mission in relation to inclusion?
When I came to Simon's Rock, I think Simon's Rock was for the people who didn't want to be in the normal place, and that was what unified them. I remember a woman saying to me the first year, "Oh, I love the Simon's Rock students, they're so feisty." And I thought, well, it's lucky I have that word, because there's some others that are crazy. actually thinking about talking about Nancy was also reminding me when I walked into the dining hall after having taken the job and I saw my first mohawk up close. This guy was one of those great big ones like that. And I thought, oh God, I hope he's not in my class. Which of course he was. He was a very sweet guy. And actually, I think Simon's Rock made a very important gesture at a certain point to try to include successful students. Do you remember? I mean, the AEP program was about, well, we need a few kids who know how to study to model it for the others. So, so again, it seems to me the history of Simon's Rock is of people who just hate it where they are. Or for whatever reason, the normal seems like, not for me, I'm going to make this huge choice. And it's, I think, a problem that was hard when we started the first BSEC was kids thinking it was a good high school. It's like, well, we don't know how to deal with people who aren't coming because they already hate high school. So, I don't know what I'm saying, except that to me, Simon's Rock was always about that, okay, you want to do this? Well, then you probably can. And, I even think about inclusion of, I'm thinking about a student who failed here miserably, semester after semester, until it was never going to happen that she was going to finish with a 2.0. But this still seemed like the best place for her. And thinking as dean, how do I make it very clear to the family where she is, and at the same time say, this is a good kid who's going to the classes and thinking about things and seems to be growing. Are we going to throw her out just because she can't get that 2.0? So, again, I see that as very important. In Queens, we have a wonderful luxury of it being, such an inclusive world that the students are coming out of, and so richly diverse, not in the sense of it's mainly black, but in the sense that it's 32 home languages. And in some ways, well, again, I think that's a luxury that I wish Simon's Rock had more of. I was going to say something to what you said, Jermaine. Something that we've done with our hires, you know how people write those educational philosophies? That's like 2 of the most boring pages. So we decided that we would say instead, please write a brief anecdote about something in your educational experience and interpret it for us. And I think what we were trying to do by that is include anybody who didn't read the ad, or who didn't read the ad and go, oh, that's an interesting idea. So, I mean, it's a way of sending us, I mean, some people obviously are going to go, high school, forget it. But to think about how we do send a message about that you're going to be asked to be creative in ways that you haven't, and that we're actually going to, we're going to read what you write because we hope that it will be something for, and at the same time very undefined. So what choice you make about whether you tell a story about your own first grade experience or, when you were defending your dissertation is all interesting.
I think following up on what I was saying about some of the transitions within Simon's Rock, I think certainly the early parts of my years as Simon's Rock faculty member was still when most of the students still wanted something really different from high school. I think maybe some of the sort of school spirit things have increased over the time that I was there. Certainly in Newark, I found that, the students want like high school plus, right? It's not that their great high school isn't serving them, because really, I don't know what that would mean in Newark to be going to a great high school that just wasn't serving your personal needs. And there's so few students who go to a great high school anyway. That's just not really a category. But in some ways, it's a bit luxurious to have that option, I guess. But for me, when I started Simon's Rock, I don't think sports or prom were either of the big things that students wanted, and sort of getting away from those were some of the reasons to go to Simon's Rock. In Newark, if I couldn't promote that we have at least some sports program and that we have a really awesome prom. We are in Jersey, prom is a big deal. I do think it's kind of awesome, I have to say, so I guess I'm well aligned in that. But if we don't have those things, literally nobody would want to go. Maybe like 4 kids. I mean, it's so unappealing because they would like that better school experience, but there's certain things that they don't have. It's just not something that they're willing to give up. I also think it's a struggle because also one of the main reasons people like the school is because it's safe, which means you do end up with students for whom it's a terrible academic match, or it eventually becomes a terrible academic match for them, but they're not going to leave because it feels like a safe space. This isn't unique to New York. I remember I had some 9th grade boys back in the first BSEC when we were in Greenpoint who were miserably failing everything. There's these nice little boys who were in Chinese where they did no work in any class. And say to the parents, they're never going to really finish high school at this rate. And the parents would say, yeah, but I like it. And what they were meaning was they liked it because they had a very small child. This seemed like a safe place to send your boy every day. And the reality is, if a parent is feeling that sending their child to a school building from whom they're quite confident the child will come home every day, that's actually not unreasonable at all. I mean, that, in a way, does need to be the first priority, but it does put us at odds sometimes with who's really the right student. There are students who stay for years in Newark who are really not the right student, but the other options are so unappealing to them that it's better to fail for years in a safe place. So, I do think if we're providing a space that people think of as literally like safe, so that you will come home alive, that's an important thing for us to be providing, but how do we mesh that with the mission of really serving the students who should be in those schools? I mean, the better answer would be is if most high schools in Newark created an environment where you came home alive every day. I think it's hard for us as a network to create that whole change, but that's something that we think about a lot. And as you think about sending a student away, we know the student really should leave the school, but you have to think about where am I sending them to? If the only options for them are really negative places in terms of safety, that becomes a worry as well.
I want to think about inclusivity and the liberal arts, and put those two words together. I don't think necessarily that the liberal arts has done a good job always of being inclusive of many voices, hence the Shakespeare issue or the Melville issue in my field. But also, I think for our students or the student population that we serve, unfortunately in Louisiana, perhaps maybe everywhere, there's been an attitude that the liberal arts is not necessarily for them, and that dual enrollment means vocational training or professional training. And for me, what I think one of the things we offer that's the biggest gift is to use the slogan, a place to think. Like, we are going to sit down and talk about Rousseau and Locke and all these guys, and also Little Coates, because we can, because they can do this work. And when people come visit our school, a lot of times they come to me afterwards and act like we're sprinkling fairy dust. And I think that there's a sort of implied microaggression there that says, that these students don't have the Tempest as something that they would be wanting to do. And so I feel very committed to making sure that we have a real liberal arts training that's offered to our student population.
Can I also jump in and build on what Cecily's saying, because we're both in New Orleans, and she's saying what I was thinking, so. But just to because Pat's comment, you want to do this, you can, being a sort of message of Simon's Rock and of Barrington College in general, is one that we work really hard on in New Orleans, and with a half-day program, we're really up against it sometimes.
Yeah.
But over the 5 years, almost 5 years that I've been involved with the early college there, we have so many students who are super happy about it, especially as they get into their second year and they're the seniors, and they are cultivating the weirdness and the sort of sense of belonging for their classmates and for people coming in who are new. And that's been a really important thing, valuing the sort of oddness of being a public school student in New Orleans who does spend time studying law in Rousseau and studying all the other things that we offer them that are in the liberal arts, that are in a thing that they're not supposed to have access to because they're Black kids from the South, or they're Black kids from an urban center in Louisiana, and they've never been offered that before. And not that every student is Black, but all of our students, they take our class as undeserving by virtue of being public school students in a city that's had historically a pretty terrifying public school record. I should know, I went to public school in New Orleans. It's not the best. But yeah, and also maybe that would make me an ideal candidate in the future to apply for a job at an early college, because maybe I'm not supposed to want that either. But guess what? I did, and I do. And also our students, I think, increasingly want to keep doing this as they go to actual college in the future, right? And I think we do get a lot of students who see their lives differently, and they tell themselves that, and they tell new students that too, and that's been a great thing to see develop over the years.
We're planning next year's seminar, and they decide what the theme is and what the texts are as a sort of baseline, and then the faculty fill it in and make it real. But they're like putting sticky notes up on our design thinking wall, and it's like, oh, they have to do The Stranger. Oh, they have to do Descartes. And to me, that's like, check plus us, you know? They think that that's something that we need to learn.
And they're very nerdy about it.
Yeah, super nerdy.
No, I have a concur with similar sentiment, just that my problem that I'm seeing across like education in general, not the same issue with the Barton network, but just like a lack of socializing just Americans in general to just have a critical consciousness and just stop and think, and to like just analyze and you know, anecdotally. I was teaching in the Bard Academy, my media and culture class, and I'm having them like watch a few documentaries because documentaries come with bells and whistles and I don't. So I haven't watched a documentary, but I'm not just like I'm just sit down and shut up and look at a documentary. That actually oftentimes are actually like the students will actually stop and pause so that we can look at one of the handouts that I've given the students. You know, remarked with the handouts that I've given, don't ask them to identify something factual about the documentary, but have to like stop and, you know, and consider, you know, like what does this mean, what's going on here. So it's asking them like all of the questions are analytical instead of factual, like, you know, where did this come from? Like it's not really there because that's something they want to say in the documentary. Just like, yeah, I don't need you to pull that out. There aren't any exams in the class. So like I'm not asking them to memorize information, instead of asking them to think about what's going on. So that's what I see is very important about what I'd like to bring to the class, and what's very typical, you know, up in the Bard network is something bringing in analysis and critical consciousness. And what's really important with that, tying it back in with mission and inclusion, I've forgotten about the purpose of the question, is that it's, you know, in another class I'm having us read about like best practices in cultural competency, and a lot of the articles that we're reading like start out with like how important diversity really is in each of these different areas, because it gives them a chance to really see things from so many different perspectives instead of just Shakespeare. And so they have an opportunity to see like all these different cultures and different walks of life, and you know different demographics. So I do my best to try to make sure that I'm pulling from as many demographics as possible to have like all of these different like ideas of thought, so they can stop and consider and say, oh, like I want them to realize how privileged they are to be an American. I also want them to realize, you know, like what's going on around them, and how like in the U.S. we are so incredibly diverse, and we should be thinking about like how many different walks of life there are, and how we're just sitting there and how many things that we're not considering because we're coming from our own background and we don't realize that we could think, you know, from a completely different perspective to consider. So it's just, if we have the opportunity to bring in many different people in many different works, so the physical people, not just the authors, in terms of diversity and inclusion. So like, just having a roommate that isn't from your same demographic can help them start to think differently. A lot of the works that I'm assigning, you know, really start out with all the many benefits that they're getting in terms of thinking and doing better.
I think one quick point. I think we follow what Ian is saying. I think part of the mission, I think one of the challenges that with the mission and the public early colleges at least, and maybe applies to privates as well, not sure, is that it goes back to this idea of the bubble and privilege. I mean, I think one of the challenges is a lot of these things in our mission are from a privileged standpoint, like having time to think and be critical and dynamic. It's a place of privilege that we all have that our students often don't have. And so kind of figure out how to, in a very public kind of, you live at home and you deal with life sort of way that our early college students are coming, the realities of their lives, trying to figure out how to create the bubble and give that privilege, right? Privilege. And then kind of facilitate that within the community of it not be, it's a temporary bubble at best, and oftentimes a bubble that's a lot of pressure. And also the students themselves kind of responding to this new privilege that they've kind of been granted through our mission and how we operate. It's just a challenge, I think, that those of us in the public setting definitely feel daily with our students.
That's exactly what I wrote down too, that we create a small bubble that intervenes in their life instead of the reverse, which is where you started from. And so even if they don't do fantastically, we have probably steered them from something else that would have been much worse. And we are probably contributing something towards social change, even with students who semi-fail at what we're proposing to do from an educational standpoint. We have still swerved them out of what would have been into something better, even if it's not necessarily going on to Bard College proper or going on to graduate school. Or so if only a few students right now might make that transition, I think we're still doing important work at this modest but key level, especially in cities with a history of violence and reality still.
And we're going to be moving into our breakout group soon where we'll be able to push forth more on these ideas. But I'm glad that we came back to the liberal arts as one of the points we were talking about in our plenary this morning, because I do think that when we look at the Bard early colleges among the national landscape of early college, which is a very large landscape now, this is really different than when Pat and I were down in Green 15 years ago. There's 2 million kids in America taking a dual enrollment course somewhere, so there's a whole lot of landscape. I think that kind of determination to keep the liberal arts as a centerpiece of this remains quite unique to the Bard network, and I think in some cases it's more of an aspiration, in some cases it's more of a reality, right? But I think that's something we need to hold to, and I also was thinking about, I'm going back to where we started with educating outside the lines staring at me, the fact that our students and their families don't necessarily know what liberal arts education is when they start it isn't an obstacle to doing it. Most of us, I mean, all of us who've done writing and thinking training, which is probably nearly everyone in the room in some way, you don't actually know what it is when you start because we always start the training by having you just start and do it. So I learned about writing and thinking without knowing what it was before I started it. I just was thrown into it and I figured it out as I went. We can do that with the liberal arts as well. So even if the family, when they're coming in for admissions, doesn't really know what you're talking about, the student can learn that by doing it. And so we can develop, we can answer a lot of these questions as we're still working on them. So I know that we have a break now. What are we saying in terms of time?
But Christy wanted to say something.
Okay, just super quickly. So I was thinking about what you were saying, Karen, and the words that I would have used to connect back to you, Karen, are gone. But I was thinking about how it begins with that nugget. The inclusion, social justice, transformation begins with that nugget that you yourself are included in the conversation. It's not about extracting what the documentarian has and like that's your only point to know what they're saying. But no, to know what you're saying, to know yourself is the center of this educational process and recognizing all the people in the classroom. And then yes, taking that out into the community. I'm here, I have a perspective, you are too. Let's have a dialogue and difference and have us go together and talk really quickly so like
Thanks, everybody. We'll reconvene in about 15
minutes. Yeah.
My husband went to send one of my clothes. Just
Yeah, I think students are. Talk to that guy.
that person. Like they, oh, so you plans out. So yeah, well, I'm like, you should go very nice.
A transition was started. I'm just making
But it's not really what.
They find it fascinating. And so right now we're gathering, and I'm getting a lot of. So I've got a paper on
This is a charity where we can
and it's not. So
it's true. Well, so that's one of the things I guess you get some exposure.
Started a project to make
Why do you
a film.
No, I mean,
we were, it's
I'm a little, it's like,
it's not quite a project that has so far. We wanted to do it.
and how about colonial experience.
Yeah, I don't know how to explain this, but talking about
I thought you would have got something to
my friend was
and so I asked the students of this who understands oppression best, and who has
It is interesting though, I think,
so which of these three authors provides the best path forward for the rest of the
so we see them as a group, what do we see them as different kinds of, in the morning, they come, it's great, it was a minority.
So that's what I mean, I do like it.
English versus history.
It has, I've seen some.
That kind of writing, slightly broader public as well.
What's your field?
Cultural studies. I'm writing a book about rapid images. But I'm also trying to do something more experimental because it just feels right. So I'm a little loose.
No, I think I remember looking at my writing is like unconventional ones. Anyway, like it's never like strictly it's not just but it's like
And but by and large, actually, that's really.
I don't think I ever offered, it's always been that, like, that's been in people over the years.
It's not every day. It's not rare.
Yeah, exactly, like I think more often as I was like, a researcher. What is it?
Yeah.
No, I did a few years.
Yes, I don't know that sense of research.
It's actually been really interesting interviews. Yeah, it's interesting too. I think that some of the also college age.
Actually, that's my objects.
And then I hope there's something like that sometimes
I'm yelling. Not that, I mean, that's not a good example of that. No, it's a particular behavior doesn't happen much, but like just like physicality. Sometimes they can't. It's like stand. Whether they're 14
20th century straightening football faces always in the context of religion. Why it doesn't need to be a type of but certainly better option.
Well, and it's also something that we need a policy.
It's just basically shape.
Don't create policies for unusual
Yes, that's right.
policies that are problematic. And then we deal with them. So, but that's the same, that's sort of that.
Yeah. I'm excited about dinner too.
And yeah, oh, I have to make a list of lunch people.
And it's, yeah, anyway, it's been. I went last year too. And it's interesting to see that. I mean, I can't speak to the French. It's interesting that the behavior before class started was not that different from what
I know.
It's not that she's like.
These things are
Everyone's kind of chatting to the bicycle was that they perform. Yeah. Out in the plaza where the bell tower is. And so we have all those windows. So I think some of us sit there, not sit there and watch them, like stare at them, but like we see them, it's like, what the hell is like, kill themselves. Yeah.
That was such a great primary. That's why I started shortlist in a couple places. But I was last year another student brought into Michigan and I went to I also I was in Michigan. Yeah, they're all amazing. I mean, it's just like, I had to completely place of the computer program. That's just like, so I mean, just like really, you know what? Like, it's a best practice that we do in high school computer, right? So it's an extra budget. So I think I also have some sort of discussion. And then the college would go there because they can already course in last year. So that means yeah, she was that's great. Like, yes, please go. I'll follow you. Like, I don't know. And that's the whole Boston connection as well. Some of them, they're not just in a year, I have to say I go and but to try to first right there, very right now. That's what I think. And that's how we get to the second.
Exactly.
Okay, good. This is what I'm seeing. Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy. Like, it's the first time I've been to meet, but all of you are in my head. I have never been off him for years. I don't know. The first time I switched over.
No, guys, my daughter went to London.
We have time for food, you know?
No, yeah. She works for
Which group do you want to be in? Which I live
Yes. So the policy headquarters is in, she is. All the groups are based on the same thing. You could have they're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I think the point is that a small conversation that you can report out.
Sign up or?
No, I think you're already.
Oh,
you're gonna get, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm taking myself out of like.
is thinking about this.
Right, so all the group leaders are on it. Carla is here, Christine's here. Please get on with things. This is.
Okay.
Are we going to groups? Yeah, I think a couple of groups can meet here. There's a room in the corner. Or, you know, just basically 4 people, 4 chairs. Carla, Guy, Shannon. He's not valuing your group. But yeah, we can start.
Right.
I definitely.
You're with Brian.
Okay, we have yourself. Oh, I'm right, I'm Jesse, I'm with John, Chris, and Renee. I didn't find my, I'm sorry. Oh, no, I just got nothing, I got some water.
What group did you have your own? Hi, nice to meet you. Dawn, I just signed you with like, yeah, but you yeah, apparently wrong.
There is nothing inherently wrong.
You find a corner, if this is not, there's also room in the corner if somebody wants to have a really, really private conversation. Drop the locations. We are here.
What does it say under my name? Okay, that helps. I'm gonna do like a weird
Just behind your head.
Awesome, we can all.
Yeah, if you want to turn the table.
All right.
So, we were talking about maybe a central hub online somewhere to share a variety of things and document types, like, for example, like maybe posting up what are your struggles and discussing that on a message board, or sharing things like syllabi and lesson plans. Could be password protected or shared between two individuals, or maybe shared to a department that would cut across multiple BSECs. Like you're saying, departments of one are common, but if you link up 5 schools, then you've got a department of 5 or more. So that could be really useful. Also, we talked about video sharing and how a lot of teachers are kind of hesitant to post up videos of them teaching. But you could maybe use it as a mode to post up if you have something you're working on. Maybe post up a video and ask for advice. So it could be a learning hub for that too. Not necessarily model teaching, but showing an example and then in a very human way, asking for feedback.
Yeah, we also talked a little bit about when the sharing is faculty to faculty and when it's more appropriate for it to be admin to admin, or different versions on depending on what the needs are and the responsible where the responsibility lies depending on the needs. We talked a little bit about that as well, and then yeah, just about technology in general and how that can be used and isn't used and doesn't sometimes work or could work in terms of what the goals are in terms of having courses, for example, that are meeting virtually through technology, and the challenges there and how much what are the needs and where would that work and not work for us.
They covered it.
Any other comments from other groups?
I would love for a hub to be in place for all writing and thinking scripts and texts, because I had to make a lot of those by myself because we had like 2 full-time staff members, which was a lot of fun, but a lot of work. You're opening a school. So.
Sometimes you discover one that works really, really well, and you're like, everybody should know about this. Page 28,
Yep.
Between the World and Me.
Yeah.
Am I next? I think, yes, Ruth is next. I'm going to jump in. We started and ended with the brand association to BARD, and what that meant both in terms of where do we see the brand, does it have meaning in our communities? Is it, the meaning, is it consistent? And also, what does it mean to be a BARD professor versus an early college faculty member, and the different expectations and disciplinary measures between those 2 sites. And just, sharing a brand association and thinking about what that means. Then we quickly breezed through a question about high schools and different 9th and 10th grade models, whereas some students are coming from different 9th and 10th grades and different experiences versus if we have an opportunity to be the 9th and 10th grade as well, and what can we learn from high school methods in particular towards dealing with students who are disinterested or who are struggling, that we could learn a lot from high school pedagogy writ large, which is not really a thing, but maybe we could be more porous about that and thinking about what we could learn from each other as we're teaching 9th and 10th grade.